You've laughed at their jokes, cried at their heartbreaks, and probably binged every season more than once. But what if I told you the real story of Friends is even crazier behind the cameras than on screen? From furniture that was rescued out of a basement to actors who almost walked away, to monkeys that stole the spotlight, this is the untold, unpredictable, and downright hilarious side of the world's most beloved sitcom. The Orange Couch was pure accident Central Perk. Wouldn't be Central Perk without that giant orange couch. It's where the gang gathered, coffee mugs in hand, episode after episode. But here's the wild part. That couch was never planned. It wasn't designed, ordered, or even bought for the show. It was found. Seriously. Production staff stumbled upon it in the basement of the Warner Brothers studio. It was dusty, a little worn out, and nobody thought much of it. But when they dragged it upstairs and plopped it into the coffee shop set, magic happened. Suddenly, the entire vibe of Central Perk shifted. The orange popped against the darker tones of the set, and more importantly, it created a cozy, central focal point for the characters to gather. Without it, scenes might have looked scattered, with the gang spread around the shop. With it, everything felt intimate, like you were sitting with them. The couch became such a pop culture symbol that replicas now sit in Warner Brothers, studio tours, and even in tourist attractions worldwide. People line up just to take a picture on the couch. Who would have thought a forgotten piece of furniture in a basement would become the most famous sofa in TV history? And trust me, that's not the only accident that turned into gold on Friends. Ross was almost played by someone else. David Schwimmer as Ross Geller feels like destiny. The awkward, dinosaur-loving paleontologist with a heart too big for his own good. It's hard to imagine anyone else pulling it off. But Ross almost had a very different face. The role of Ross was written with Schwimmer in mind, but he wasn't even sure he wanted to do it. After multiple failed pilots, Schwimmer was frustrated with TV and close to walking away. So, the casting team held auditions for other actors, just in case. Names like John Cryer and Jon Favreau were floated. Cryer even auditioned, but due to timing, his tape didn't make it back from London in time for NBC executives to see it. Favreau was seriously considered, but eventually turned it down. Eventually, producers convinced Schwimmer that this part was his. And when he signed on, Ross became the neurotic, lovable oddball audiences fell for. Imagine if Schwimmer had said no. Would Ross's whiny, "We were on a break," still echo in pop culture? Probably not. Sometimes the right actor and the right role collide by sheer luck, and Friends was one of those times. And speaking of roles almost lost, wait until you hear how Jennifer Aniston nearly didn't make it past season 1. But before that, let's talk about another what if that could have changed everything. Phoebe and Joey's love story that never happened. Phoebe and Joey were always the wild cards of the group, quirky, offbeat, and just a little unpredictable. Their bond felt special, and for years fans speculated, why didn't they end up together? Well, behind the scenes, the writers actually thought about it. During the early seasons, there were serious conversations about making Phoebe and Joey a couple. On paper, it made sense. They were both eccentric, shared a goofy chemistry, and could have provided a love story without the heaviness of Ross and Rachel's drama. But the writers pulled back. They worried the show was already juggling enough romance with Ross and Rachel's will they won't they, and Monica and Chandler's eventual relationship. Adding another couple could have shifted the balance too far into soap opera territory. Lisa Kudrow and Matt LeBlanc, however, loved the idea. In fact, during the final season, they pitched a secret backstory. What if Phoebe and Joey had been hooking up casually the whole time, just off camera? Nothing serious, just a running gag that explained their closeness. The writers laughed but never pulled the trigger. Still, that what if hangs over the show. Imagine how different things would have been if the finale had revealed Joey and Phoebe were secretly together all along. It didn't happen, but it remains one of the biggest almost storylines in sitcom history. The cast's insane salary negotiations. At the beginning, the 6 stars of Friends weren't the global icons we think of today. They were just 6 hopeful actors cast in a new sitcom that no one could guarantee would even last a season. In fact, during that very first year, each of them was making about $22,000 per episode. Good money for young talent, but nowhere near the fortune they'd earn later. As the show exploded in popularity, something else started happening behind the curtain. By season 3, paychecks weren't equal anymore. Some cast members were making more than others, and the imbalance created tension. It could have torn the group apart, but instead of letting jealousy or competition get in the way, they made a bold decision that shocked the industry. All 6 agreed. No one negotiates alone. If one of them got a raise, they all did. If one held out, they all held out. This was unheard of in Hollywood at the time. It was risky because if the studio called their bluff, the show could have crumbled. But the gamble worked. NBC and Warner Brothers couldn't imagine Friends without all 6 characters, so they gave in. The result was history-making. By the final 2 seasons, every single actor was earning $1 million per episode, a record-setting number for television in the late 90s and early 2000s. But the move wasn't just about money, it was about loyalty. Their solidarity kept resentment out of the dressing rooms and proved that the unity we loved seeing on screen was real behind the cameras too. And their move changed Hollywood forever. Ensemble casts from Seinfeld to The Big Bang Theory followed their lead. 6 young actors had quietly rewritten the rulebook. And it all came from choosing friendship over rivalry. That time, Matthew Perry saved Chandler Bing's sarcastic one-liners are legendary. The way he could turn even the most awkward silence into a laugh was part of what's made Friends so special. But here's the twist. Many of those jokes weren't written by the show's award-winning team of writers at all. They came directly from Matthew Perry. Perry had a gift that couldn't be taught. He had this razor-sharp instinct for comedy, almost like a sixth sense. If a punchline fell flat during rehearsals, he'd speak up. Sometimes, he'd pause, smirk, and then toss out a new line that instantly had the crew doubled over with laughter. The writers weren't offended, they embraced it. They knew Perry had an ear for Chandler's voice in a way nobody else could. Over the years, some of Chandler's most quoted lines were improvised or reworked by Perry right there on the spot. But behind those laughs, Perry's personal life told a much different story. At the very height of Friends' fame, he was quietly battling serious addiction and health issues. His struggles were so overwhelming that later, he admitted there were entire seasons he could barely remember filming. Fans who rewatch the show today can actually see his weight changing dramatically from season to season, a physical reminder of what he was going through. And yet, even during his darkest times, his comedic brilliance never disappeared. The cast has said time and again that Perry was the fastest wit among them, able to outjoke anyone in the room. His humor didn't just add laughs, it shaped Chandler into the lovable, neurotic, self-deprecating character audiences adored. Matthew Perry's journey was full of struggles, but his quick thinking and comedic genius quite literally saved Chandler Bing. Without him, Chandler wouldn't be Chandler. The audience wasn't always laughing. One of the best parts of watching Friends is hearing the audience laugh right along with you. That laughter feels contagious. And here's the secret. It wasn't canned or artificial. It was real. Each episode was filmed in front of a live studio audience of about 300 people, which made every taping feel more like a stage play than a traditional TV shoot. This setup brought a special kind of pressure. The actors weren't just performing for the cameras, they were performing for a crowd sitting just feet away. Every joke had to land in real time, and sometimes they didn't. When a punchline fell flat, the writers didn't just shrug and hope the TV audience wouldn't notice. They'd quickly huddle, scribble down new lines, and the cast would jump back into the scene and try again. In a way, it was like testing material in a comedy club, instant feedback, immediate rewrites, and a real audience as the judge. But this process wasn't always glamorous. Filming a single 22-minute episode could stretch on for 6, sometimes even 7 hours. Imagine sitting in the audience watching the same scene played out over and over until it finally clicked. It could be exhausting, but it also created an electric energy. When a scene finally nailed the laugh, the room erupted. There was another challenge, too. Secrecy. Audience members saw major storylines unfold before the rest of the world, from Monica and Chandler's surprise hookup to shocking cliffhangers. To keep spoilers from leaking, the studio often swore people to secrecy or shuffled the order of scenes just to throw the crowd off. So when you hear laughter on Friends, know this. It wasn't just background noise. It was hundreds of real people in the moment reacting to comedy that was often rewritten seconds before delivery. The apartment numbers were changed. If you've ever rewatched Friends from the beginning, you might have spotted something strange. In Season 1, Monica's apartment door proudly displays the number 5, while Joey and Chandler's across the hall is marked with a 4. Seems fine at first. Until a few episodes later, the numbers mysteriously change. Suddenly, Monica's place is apartment 20, and Joey's becomes 19. So, what happened? Was it a continuity error? A set designer slip-up? Actually, it was neither. It was a deliberate fix. In the early episodes, the writers and crew hadn't fully thought through the geography of Monica's apartment. Giving it a low number, like 5, suggested she lived on the ground floor or maybe the second floor, but sharp-eyed fans quickly noticed the problem. Monica's windows showed sweeping views over New York City, the kind of skyline you'd only see from way up high. It didn't add up. Rather than could ignore it, the production team decided to quietly change the numbers mid-series to make them more realistic. By shifting Monica's apartment to number 20 and Joey's to 19, it now implied they lived on a higher floor in their iconic Greenwich Village building. And just like that, the problem was solved. No explanation, no in-show acknowledgement, just a little behind-the-scenes correction. It might seem like a tiny detail, but it's one of those quirks that shows how closely fans were paying attention to Friends. Viewers weren't just watching the jokes, they were noticing the set design, the little inconsistencies, the world-building details. That level of devotion kept the show on its toes. Even now, decades later, the apartment number switch is one of the most famous continuity errors in sitcom history. Except, of course, it wasn't really an error at all. Jennifer Aniston almost didn't return. Jennifer Aniston is often seen as the breakout star of Friends. Rachel, Green's style, her will they won't they romance with Ross, and of course that famous haircut all turned Aniston into a household name. But here's the wild part. At the very beginning, her future on the show was anything but guaranteed. When Friends was first starting out, Aniston was already tied to another CBS sitcom called Muddling Through. It wasn't exactly high profile, but contracts are contracts. If Muddling Through had found an audience and turned into a hit, Jennifer Aniston would have been forced to leave Friends after just a handful of episodes. Imagine the show without Rachel Green. The thought almost feels impossible. NBC executives realized this looming disaster and decided to take matters into their own hands. They wanted Aniston badly, so they essentially sabotaged Muddling Through. How? By scheduling it against some of their strongest, most unmissable programming, making sure it stood no chance in the ratings. It was a ruthless but clever play. Within weeks, Muddling Through tanked. CBS canceled it, and Jennifer Aniston was suddenly free to devote herself fully to Friends. Looking back, it's one of the luckiest breaks in television history. Without Aniston, there would have been no Rachel, no epic Ross and Rachel love story, no fashion influence that defined a decade. Rachel Green wasn't just another character, she was the spark that made the ensemble feel complete. It's incredible to think the future of Friends, one of the most beloved shows of all time, hinged on something as seemingly small as scheduling tricks and a bit of network sabotage. In a way, Aniston's entire career and the DNA of the show itself was saved by a lucky twist of fate. The secret about Marcel the monkey, Ross's pet monkey. Marcel was an early fan favorite. Cute, funny, and mischievous, what's not to love? But behind the scenes, Marcel was a nightmare. Played by a capuchin named Katie, the monkey constantly missed cues, climbed around the set, and frustrated the cast. David Schwimmer hated working with her. He later admitted that Marcel often ruined takes, wasted time, and distracted the crew. At one point, he said he personally lobbied to write Marcel out of the show. Eventually, both the cast and the trainers agreed it was time to move on. Marcel was written off, and Ross focused more on human relationships. Fans might have missed the monkey, but the cast definitely didn't. The fountain shoot was a freezing nightmare. The opening credits of Friends look carefree. 6 pals splashing around in a fountain, laughing under twinkling lights. But the reality? It was miserable. The shoot took place at Warner Brothers in Burbank, and the cast had to spend hours in freezing water. None of them were told beforehand what the shoot would involve. They showed up, saw the fountain, and realized they'd be drenched. To make matters worse, it was late at night and the water wasn't heated. Lisa Kudrow later joked that she hated it. Matt LeBlanc admitted he ended up with a cold. The iconic sequence that fans love so much was pure discomfort for the cast. And yet, it became one of the most recognizable openings in television history. Sometimes suffering really does make for great art. The cast secretly hated the theme song, I'll Be There For You, as one of the most recognizable theme songs ever. But here's the shocker. The cast secretly hated it. They grew tired of hearing it over and over during rehearsals and shoots. The Rembrandts song was catchy, sure, but it played on a loop while filming the credits and promo material. By the 100th time, it wasn't cute anymore. Jennifer Aniston once said they all dreaded hearing those opening notes on set. Of course, the audience didn't feel that way. The song hit the charts, fans bought the single, and it became a cultural anthem of the 90s. The cast may have hated it, but the world couldn't get enough. The final episode's emotional goodbye. When Friends finally wrapped in 2004, it wasn't just the end of a television show, it was the end of an era that had defined a decade of pop culture. For the cast, the thought of saying goodbye after 10 years together was almost unbearable. Before filming the very last scene, the 6 actors huddled together backstage, holding each other tightly, crying, and trying to soak in the moment. The finale was filmed in front of a live studio audience, but the emotions you see on screen weren't acting. They were real. Jennifer Aniston later admitted that she couldn't bring herself to watch the finale for years afterward because the memories were too painful. David Schwimmer described it as feeling like a family breaking apart, while Courtney Cox confessed that she burst into tears so often during filming that she had to redo takes with her makeup constantly being touched up. And after the director called the final cut, something remarkable happened. The cast didn't just pack up and leave. They lingered. They walked slowly around Monica's apartment, touching the walls, running their hands over the furniture, and saying private goodbyes to a set that had been their second home for 10 long years. For fans watching at home, the finale was bittersweet, an emotional farewell to characters they'd grown up with. But for the cast, it was a heartbreaking chapter, closing in their real lives. Maybe that's why the finale wasn't just popular, it became one of the most watched episodes in television history. Conclusion. From a basement couch to million-dollar paydays, from freezing fountains to secret grudges against a theme song, Friends was just as unpredictable behind the scenes as it was on screen. These stories remind us that what looks effortless often hides chaos, accidents, and a lot of luck. And maybe that's why the show still works. It wasn't perfect, it was messy, human, and full of surprises, just like the friendships it portrayed. So, which of these secrets shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from the shows you love. We'll see you in the next one.